Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our online Zoom discussion with our featured artists for the month of July. We have been doing this every time we have an exhibition, giving our audience and followers an opportunity to talk to the artists when they're not able to maybe attend our opening receptions or to catch the artists in person. This is another opportunity to learn from the artists and to ask questions if you have them. I want to also introduce the gallery assistants for Hillyer who are going to be assisting me. I'm Tim Brown, I'm the Hillyer director. I'm joined by Cassandra Bartlett, who's a gallery assistant, and Dan Leisman, who's also a gallery assistant. Cassandra's going to be introducing the artists and facilitating some of the discussions, and Dan's going to be checking the chat for questions and facilitating the Q&A throughout the program as well. Before we continue with the program, I want to acknowledge our supporters. I want to thank the National Endowment for the Arts and the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities for their support. So let's get started. I'm going to turn things over to Cassandra, who's going to introduce our artists for today.
Thank you, Tim, for that introduction. And thank you all again for joining. It's so great to see how many people are here to listen to these wonderful artists currently exhibiting. I would like to start by introducing our first artist, Kristen Adair. She will be talking about her exhibit, Unconditional. Just a little introduction. She's a Washington, D.C. based artist, focuses mainly in documentary filmmaking and multimedia works. So I'll leave her to give her full backstory, but please help me welcome Christine.
Hey there. Can you all hear me okay? Sorry, I'm in a bit of a strange spot. So I'm glad that I'm able to join you all. Yeah, thanks so much for the introduction, and thanks to everyone who's joining today. I'll just give a little bit of background, and then I'm gonna show just a little clip of the video piece that's in my installation if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So as Cassandra mentioned, I'm a DC-based documentary filmmaker, photographer, multimedia artist. I'm also trained as an attorney and worked and do a lot of things that fall into the category of advocacy and activism. And my primary work is pretty different actually than what is in this this installation, which is really exciting. So in my, I guess, day-to-day, I run my own social impact production company called Unchained Stories, and I do a lot of work around justice and advocacy, working with nonprofit organizations that are working in areas around transformative justice and community. And so this work is really, really personal, the work in this exhibition, Unconditional. And it's certainly the most personal work that I have ever put out into the world. And I think the reason that came about because of the pandemic, in fact, when all of my other work, as most of us, I think, sort of just came to a screeching halt, I had this opportunity to dive into these ideas that I had been holding for a little while, but just really hadn't had the capacity or the mental space for. And the great pause allowed me to dive into this really personal work. And so I'll just describe a little bit about the work and how it came to be. Yeah, so it really came about. It's been for a few years prior, I had taken possession from a family member of this box of letters and photographs, letters that my grandfather wrote to my grandmother over the course of 3 years that he was stationed in the South Pacific during World War II, along with photographs. And my grandfather, which I actually didn't know when I was a kid, was a photographer because he took these really incredible photographs that, I had, when I knew him, I didn't see him with a camera, but he took these really incredible photographs, and was carrying a camera with him in these really harsh conditions, as I understand, sort of island hopping in the South Pacific on these little islands that the American military was taking over from Japanese control one by one, and basically turning them into airstrips so they could fly bombers out of the South Pacific. So, and he was an airplane mechanic, and he carried his camera everywhere. And he wrote, and he and my grandmother exchanged letters basically on a weekly or more frequently than weekly basis for 3 years. And they had met not so long before he was drafted. And so they really built a relationship through these letters. So I only have one side of the letters. It's kind of a funny aside. People always ask. My grandmother's letters didn't make it home, I think, from the South Pacific, but his letters that had been sent home did survive. So anyway, I was just fascinated by this. Both my grandparents had passed away, and I was doing a lot of personal work myself around lineage and relationship and self-reflection in my own place in the world and in relationships. And so there was something here that was just like, this is the map that has been put into my genetics around love and relationships. This is my lineage. And I just really took the time to dive into them as if I was sort of studying what was here, and what was in me. And it was really a transformative experience of self-reflection. And so it just started there. And then I had also had this idea for a while to do some really manual physical work with printed photographs. I am a lover of things on paper, even though I move about most of my time and most of my work in a digital space now. I love prints and photo prints. And I was originally trained as a photographer, shooting film as a kid, before pre-digital. Give away my age, but pre-digital, I was, darkroom photographer. And so I've always kind of played and loved this idea of like manipulating photographs and prints and physical objects, and also layering negatives and double exposure and different points have played with that when I had this kind of creative time to do this playful work. And so I had this idea to actually physically combine photographs. And so again, in this great pause of the pandemic time, I had this opportunity. I had me in my apartment and these letters and these photographs and my photo printer, which had been sitting idle in the sort of busy time. And I was like, all right, let's just do this. And so it really became a meditative practice of figuring out how to weave these photos together, which is one of the other main components of the exhibition. So thinking about how imagery and sort of past and present combines in us, in our bodies, in our psyches, and playing with what would it look like to actually put imagery, past and present, and different imagery together physically. And so I kind of developed this approach to weaving paper that, I certainly other people have done it. I've seen it in different settings a little bit, but there were no instructions for it. I just sort of figured out how to do it. And I'm not a textile artist particularly, so it was new to me to just kind of devise this method. But it's been an evolving process, and it's really been a meditative and self-reflective process. So the last thing I'll say, and then I'll show a little clip of video, and I can show a couple of the woven pieces as well, is that then that idea then led to the idea of, well, why can't I weave video? What would that look like? What would it look like to layer and weave and combine video that is past and present and sort of future imaginative? And so I started to dive into that. And the video that I created that's in the piece, it really feels like, I call it an intergenerational self-portrait. I put myself in it, which is, as I said, not something that I do have done really in my work very much at all. And so, and then really just this, as if sort of a video journal, a video poem that was this really self-reflective. And it was a process for me that was as much about the process of reflecting and combining images as it was about the finished product, if that makes sense. And so it's been really incredible to see it sort of in the space and on the wall and have people interacting with it in the gallery. So yeah, so let me just play like the first couple minutes of the video. I think I should be able to share my screen here, and then I'll show a couple of the printed pieces as well. August 22nd, 1943. Darling, another hot night and not much wind. The mosquitoes are terrific. There's a list of what we can't say in our letters posted now, and it's getting tough to make these the least bit interesting. About the only thing I do is work all day trying to keep the ship flying. It's Lois Ruth III now. We're hoping this new one will keep from getting hit like the last two. It gets dark quick. I usually hit the hay about 8:30 p.m. Interesting life, don't you think? Maybe it could be worse, but I'm beginning to doubt that. There are still about 100 men with more time than me around here yet, so you can figure I have a long road ahead. This condition of being very much in love and now a little island happy is slowly getting me. You can come to Hillyer to see the rest. And so I guess just a couple more things to say about that, and then I'll just show a couple of the woven pieces, and then I'm happy to take, I think we're going to go on to Gabrielle or take questions, I'm not sure. But yeah, so the components of the letter, of the film basically are the letters, but I took the letters and used them in essence to reflect on my own experience. So I took different kind of sentences and phrases and sections from multiple different letters and built a narrative that was really kind of exploring my own experience, a bit like building a poem or building a script from this raw material of my grandfather's words, and interwove those with archival materials. A lot of what you saw in that first section, which is kind of the past section, is photographs that my grandfather did take, as well as kind of family photos and other found materials, and then video and visuals that I created, and present day imagery that also in creating it was really a self-reflective kind of intuitive practice for me, process for me. So then just thinking about this kind of these ideas, these themes of relationship and connection and disconnection and isolation and self-representation. I was thinking a lot about the way in the pandemic time that the way that I was representing myself and my experience was in this sort of strange digital space of social media and video and interaction and the idea of isolation and the way that my grandparents were so isolated in this time from one another that we were then in that not an entirely dissimilar space in the pandemic time. So yeah, so that's sort of the approach, and really invite folks, if they haven't seen the whole video, to see it in the space. I had an experience of seeing it on the wall and in large scale in projection form, compared to creating it, on a little screen. So it's and the audio, I should say too, is is woven, and there's many layers. I think at some points there's 8 or 10 different layers of audio that are woven together that go with the imagery and sort of the layering effect. So let me just briefly show a couple of the weavings. Yeah, so this is just an example of one of the images, and I should say that these are the woven pieces, and these images, the archival images, are images that my grandfather took, and they are of airplanes that have these pinup girls painted on them, and that was one of the things. This was it's an art form that was unique, and I think unique to World War II, that there were artists who were there who were painting these representations of their own wives, partners, girlfriends, or I don't know, from magazines or what have you. And I was just sort of fascinated by this means of representation of the female body as well. And so that was not all the weavings, but most of them are exploring that idea. So yeah, so it's woven paper, and it's pretty intricate work. It's I think I developed really a different practice of patience in this time of isolation, and as I said, really meditative practice. So and there's a few others. There's one color woven piece that's more recent, that's in the show, that I would invite you to go and check out as well. All right, so I think is that good, Cassie?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristen.
Sure. And I'm happy to take questions after we hear from Gabrielle.
I was going to say, actually, due to the nature of how we're going to go about this, and possibly with a time limit for the artist, Kristen, we're going to take Q&As right now, at least a couple. Dan, the other gallery assistant, she'll lead some questions that she might have already received, and then we'll open it up for about 5 minutes.
Great.
Thank you, Kristen. I have a couple questions for you. The first is, do you imagine down the road creating a partner installation about your grandmother despite not having any of her letters? And if so, what could that look like?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I mean, well, I think it is about my grandmother on some level, and it's interesting because I actually was on some level putting myself into the place of my grandmother, right? Because I was reading the letters as if I was receiving them. And so, yeah, it's interesting. I know she wrote many letters, but they just didn't survive. So I think that's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about it, but I definitely want to do more exploration of lineage and ancestry and roots, and I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I do have a lot of photographs of my grandmother, and I think some that she had taken as well. My family is very creative, and there's a lot of creative work that came from. I don't think any of them considered themselves artists per se, but there's photographs and yeah, these albums that my grandmother created, where she put photographs into albums and has sort of written commentary around them. So I think there's a lot more to explore with it. Yeah, so that's a good question. But yeah, I definitely was really in the headspace of my grandmother on some level, and experiencing what she was experiencing in this time of isolation and separation. And quite frankly, I think I get the sense from my grandfather's letters, and that's something that comes through in the video, I think, or that I was thinking about in the video, was that she had some real hesitation and anxiety about their relationship. And I think, I can only imagine that had to do with the fact that she had no idea if he was going to come home. And so she was sort of living life, and she was in school at the time, and then started her career as a teacher. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting kind of place to explore that dynamic of relationships that they experience. So I don't know if that precisely answered your question, but it was a good one. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it does sound like even in the absence of letters, there is still like a huge presence there. I have a question for you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your approach to weaving, because obviously,
Sorry.
um,
Automatic light where I am that just went off.
weaving is like it comes from a history of textile work. So I was just wondering how you approach it and how it caught your eye and what interests you about weaving and working in different media.
Yeah. Like I said, I think I'm sort of interested in textile and I didn't mention, but there are also some fabric prints that are in the exhibition that are actually the letters themselves. And so I have certainly been interested in fabric, and I'm interested in the way that imagery on textile, it moves and interacts with the world in a different way. And so this idea of weaving, though, I think really came from less about textile and more about combining imagery. And there are also some still images that are layered, that are what I would call digital double exposure. And I've also, as I mentioned, played with physical double exposure using film in past work. But I was interested in the way that images, and I've also been interested in imagery that is, reflection or other ways that images are combined. And so this was an idea of like, what would it look like to actually physically combine imagery? And so the process is, I tried some different things because it's not quite the same as weaving a fabric or textile. Because I'm not using a loom, I'm actually turning the paper into its own loom. And so I take one of the images and essentially turn it into a loom by keeping the edges intact and creating the strips, and then the other gets woven through. And I've sort of refined the technique as it's gone along. It's gotten a lot more refined and quicker is a generous word, but it's gotten more efficient. It's definitely a slow process, but it's a really intentional process. And yeah, so it's really just a matter of, and I just tried some different things like taking apart photos and combining them in different ways. And that's how I came to the technique. I've actually been thinking about potentially even taking a class in textile weaving or loom weaving to learn more, because it's not really something I know a lot about. It's paper craft has always been, as I mentioned, a little bit like a practice for me. I've done some bookmaking. I've done some sort of three-dimensional paper work, paper making, some print making a little bit, and always sort of just loving working with physical prints. I am like a old school person who actually has a photo printer, a photographer who has a photo printer and is not just living in digital land. And so I will say that sometimes my photo printer gets cranky because I haven't used it and it gets clogged, because it's like you need to print on me like once a week or else I'm going to stop working. But yeah, so I just love holding photos, even if they've been created digitally, even if they've come from, somewhere else. And so that was sort of and also like needing a tangible grounding connection in the isolating time of like, okay, I'm just going to hold these photos and I'm going to figure out what it would look like to put them together. So that was really how the practice came about.
And Kristen, I want to build on this discussion because I was fascinated with your work when I saw that you were using this weaving technique. I recalled a very well-known artist named Howardina Pindell, who used to use a very similar technique. But what was interesting, she started to use the technique because she had lost her memory. And she had traveled to different parts of the world and wanted to recall what those experiences were like. And her way of doing that was taking the photos that she took of the different places she visited and started piecing them together through these woven strips of imagery. So I was curious if this technique that you were using was also a way for you to piece together memories, or, you know, what Toni Morrison used to call rememory of some sorts.
I love that. And I don't know that work, so I definitely need to take a look at it. And I think, yeah, I mean, it was a way, in essence, I had my grandparents' memories through this imagery. And so it was a way to kind of embody those memories that aren't my memories, but they are also, you know, epigenetically embedded in me. And so this idea of how do I access this lineage and then sort of relate it to my own experience in the present. And so in that way, it's almost like, to me, I thought of it as like a physical manifestation of looking at past and present coming together, and looking at memory and really genetic information, because we are, and I'm actually really fascinated by this science, which is relatively new, kind of neuroscience and epigenetics, and in the way, and in my work generally, and in my documentary work, I've thought a lot about and studied a little bit of the work around neuroscience and story. That's a bit of an aside, but it's related in that the way that we carry story and memory inside of us, and experiences that we have had directly, but also we carry the experience of all of the people and generations and lineage that came before us in our literal DNA. And so it was something in that too that I wanted to really, like, what would happen if I actually physically like explore putting those things together and understanding how they relate to each other, if it makes sense. So yeah, I really think it is a lot about memory. So I appreciate that reflection, and I also want to check out that work for sure. Thanks, Tim.
Last call for questions for Kristen. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Dan, for leading that. And thank you, Kristen, for answering those questions and wonderful explanations and diving deeper into those works. I love the memory cue on there. So thank you again. And next we'll have our second artist who's exhibiting. And she'll give a little talk about her installation in the exhibit. You can see it. It's beautifully displayed behind her on the background. So the artist is Gabrielle Lajoie-Bergeron. I hope I got that right. So she's a French-Canadian multidisciplinary artist. She's based in Baltimore, but she's been exhibiting all around the world, from the US to Canada, Europe, even Africa and South America. So we're grateful to have her here, and I'll leave the rest up to her. Everybody, please help me welcome Gabrielle.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me correctly? Yes. Okay. So like Cassandra said, I'm French Canadian, so my first language is French. So I'm sorry for my accent, or if you don't understand exactly what I'm saying, so you can write or just, I don't know, wave, and I will repeat, no problem. So yeah, so I mean, that's more like she said, since 2018. So I'm like really sharing my life since that time between Quebec and that's more. And in the last couple of years, my practice brought me, like she's in different places around the world. So it kind of fed my my interests and my exploration. So I'm really, in general, outside of the specific project, I'm really interested in the concept of territories, no matter if they are like intimate or public or physical. And I'm really interested in stories, like reconnecting forgotten stories or story we don't want to hear about. I also question a lot the historical frame of painting, drawings, and I do like trying to put everything together, like the small story with the big history of art, and just trying to kind of make links together a little bit like a quilt. So I am quite interested also with like legends and myths and the archetype of the woman, the figure of the woman, and how it builds stories over the year. So yeah, it's a little introduction. But for this project with the Hillyer Gallery, so I will try to make a little context around it, but it will be quite quick. So the name of the exhibition is Masha Le Gros Party. And I started working on it, I would say maybe 3 years ago, kind of back and forth. So it is really like the logical continuation of the project that I am carrying out since maybe 2016. So to make it quick, it was still the project I was working before, they were reflecting on the image of the witch and the reactivation of the legend as source of empowerment in the feminist counterculture. So I worked a lot in South America with different group of women like shaman and yeah. So from there, I started getting interested about legend and the figure of the woman in the ritual. So I started a project. I'm from like a small town named La Malbaie, Charlevoix in Quebec, and I started a project with them, with the museum there, and tried to see how those women were involved in legend. And I crossed the word Masha, so it was a little bit where everything started. So it's a really long-term project with several steps, and everyone was nourishing the other one and transform it a little bit. So yeah, so sorry, I hate computer and screen. So Masha itself, it's really, the project is really about the notion of celebration and party in the intimate, public, and also political spaces. Masha itself, the word means masks, but also from the Low Latin, it means witch. So that was kind of making sense with where I was at this time, because it was pre-pandemic, so the mask was not that trendy. So yeah, so I continue working on that. So those kind of masks were made at the time with like wood, leather, metal, plaster, cardboard, paper, and plant. So through a series of drawing, painting, and sculpture, I create this installation that is presented right now. And the project is inspired by this material to create the space where I try to put kind of a little bit of fiction and reality overlap a little bit. So as I said a little bit before, I was interested in this idea of celebration and party. So using this idea of the mashup, I was interested with the way that the mask we use it often to express like people can hide their identity of the person behind the mask that we wear. So often when we wear a mask, everything is allowed and often nothing can be refused. The masha also represent, like for me, political, social, even economical or sexual movement. It's for me, the masha itself, it's a certain form of, represent a certain form of power and hierarchies. It's a really hard word to say in English, hierarchies. You know, behavior that are not necessarily appropriate, but we let it go under the cover of the party. So the other part of the title, Le Gros Party, is a French expression which means in like the popular language, like the big party, but more like the place you needed to be or that you cannot miss. So for this project, as I say, I was inspired by the code of the festivities. So I use a lot of like balloon, glitter, fringes, flashing lights to question the notion of overflow and excess. So from yesterday to today, the celebration is often defined by dancing, singing, a lot of food, a lot of drinking. We often just giving everything until we get exhausted, until even we get sick. And it's sometimes the law of the festivities itself. And I feel that our culture now pass from some form of really or well orchestrated event, or even like rite of passage, to celebration that are a little bit stripped of their meaning in favor often of just taking good photos or videos that will feed our social media. So that was a part that I was kind of trying to dig when I thought about this project. So, for some culture, the festivities itself can take like several weeks, even more like months, to just collecting the amount of food or object that they want to just give. And at the end of it, we often just consume them, spend them, destroy them, or just even like waste all the food. So I was kind of interested about this part. So for me, the party as well as the mashup represent a form of escape from our life, like breaking with the everyday. It's a certain way to kind of touch another word, and during those kind of moments, there's a lot of gestures and words that will be allowed or that we will forgive under this kind of like I said, the cover of the party. So the project was trying to flirt a little bit with this kind of insolence and the fact there's sometimes few like there's not that much prohibition anymore. So the project, the party, make it possible sometimes to become someone else. But I was asking myself, what happened when those events just overflow? What is behind? What are we searching behind this this party? What are we searching behind the singing or just the simple drinking? So the party that I evokes refer to this kind of masquerade that we offer in our time when the celebration begin to lose its glamour and often start also to be a form of violence or let place to different form of abuses. So the project itself was also about questioning this idea of dissimulation, the fear of the other, the unknown, the stuff that we don't talk about, the unspoken, and those these double meaning will embody various extended form of past and present ritual. Also, I was questioning the practice, the different kind of way that we practice now rituals or just form of celebrate form of passage or just games in general. But it's also a way, because I feel that now the new rite are often linked with those kind of the culture of the rape and also some boys club and some political deception that we have. So this project for me was also about identity, power, and the relationship we have with others when we are in events that are not linked with normal day-to-day life. So in subtitle, it's also about transformation and cover-up and transgression, even intimidation. So when I create the project, I wanted to create the feeling of you walking into a room after a party where you were not necessarily invited. So you're walking through the rubble, the les corps morts in French, like the dead bodies. It's a form of a mess where you discover the different eclectic elements that surrounded you. You kind of understand what happened, but not all. You try to fill some gaps. You feel that maybe you missed a big event, but when you look at it, maybe not that much. Everything is just too bright, too shiny. You feel almost aggressed. It's just, it's just kind of too much. So for me, that was kind of the idea. And yeah, because the celebration often rhymes with power. So I try to play with the code of the party, like I say, like the saturated color, the sparkling materials, the balloons. And I try to create an installation that when you have the first contact, it's really joyful. But when you start looking element by element, well, this is maybe not that funny. So there's a tension between elements who are passing through this form of joy and violence. So you don't exactly know where to put yourself. And my goal is that the visitor discover little by little everything that clash. Also, for me, a reflection of the society that we often turn our eyes on and we just don't want to hear about. So there is an object on the ground, the painting are hanging from the ceilings, there's object at different places, so the visitor doesn't really have choice to move around the space and be careful and passes some objects. So the way you see elements is different than when you usually go to see an exhibition. So that was for me important in the idea of reflecting this kind of celebration. So you need to kind of walk into the room and you need to watch your step. So that was what I was trying to do with this project. So I don't know if it works, but this is what I was trying to do. I don't know if you have any question, if it's clear, or maybe it is not. There's multiple layers to that thing. So I tried to kind of put everything together, but I'm sure I missed some part, but we can discuss about it. And yeah, maybe just before finishing, I just want to thank the Hillyer Gallery also, and the Canadian Council for the Art, and also the Quebec Art Council for their support to this project, who had like multiple phases. So yeah.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Yes, that was great. That was great. So same as before, we're going to open it up for a Q&A, and Dan's going to go ahead and lead that. If you haven't done so already, you can always unmute yourself and ask the questions, or you can send them to Dan and she can ask them for you. So we'll open it up there.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabrielle, so much. The first question that I have for you right now is, what is the relationship between the handmade and the ready-made objects in this piece, and how do you see them relating to each other?
This piece, is there like a piece in general? This is like
or in the installation, I guess, what's the relationship between the pieces that you've made by hand and the pieces that are ready-made?
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I asked myself about it. Most of the objects are most of the objects I made them myself, like the sculptures and most of the paper, also pedestal. So the things that are not made by myself are some little ceramic like that I use for pedestal. But the relation between them, well, I didn't ask myself about that. That's a good question. But I'm coming from a family of we're doing like a lot of fabric and whatever. So I think it's already real to me. But for me, it was also interesting to put those kind of objects together. The one that we buy when we try to create those party home, and we just throw this in the garbage can after, and make it like in opposition with the time that we need to do those little stuff. So there's like a part of me is really interested about the time that we take to create and make stuff against the time that we just when it's done, we just throw everything away. So I think it's something we need to think a little bit more about, but yeah.
I have a question for you. So going off of what you just said, the things like the streamers and the sort of like party decorations, do you use new things every time, like as part of the installation, the actual act of throwing away part of the show and getting new things for the next installation? Or do you keep the same objects?
I try to keep the same thing. Like the show is that's presented at Hillyer right now. Like a month ago was presented like in Quebec City. The room was like 3 times the size. So it was interesting also to rethink about how we can recreate the story with different fragments. But no, I keep like all the elements and I reuse them, and often I create other stuff with that, or I use it as a different part for maybe a future exhibition. So most of the elements will be reused or are already reused. So they have like multiple purpose on it. So I try to not do what we usually do when we do those kind of celebration, and I kind of reuse them. So yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I have a comment. We were fortunate enough to see your show come together from the moment you began your installation to the moment you completed everything, and it helped me to it led me to recall what some of the things that you brought up, like the concepts of excess, concepts of ritual. For example, when you finally completed the installation, there did appear to be kind of a coming together of some kind of cohesion. But at the same time, there still seemed to remain this kind of tension between, I guess, the normality, I guess, of ritual celebration and excess. And so even though the installation was complete, I feel that you were successful at achieving what you set out to achieve, because there still remains, even in this completion, this state of tension and this sort of, for lack of a better word, spillage that seems to be spilling over into the excess of any kind of pre-configured boundary or meaning that you may have. And I find myself like constantly, every time I go in there every day, I'm learning new things. I'm discovering new things all the time. I feel that in that regard, the exhibition is very successful, and to me anyway, especially in a way in terms of how experiential it is. Yeah, so I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you. And in fact, it made me think about something who also maybe can answer the first question. So the way I kind of create the exhibition itself, you can find sometimes elements that were pre-made, but I reinterpret them in other places. So for example, you can find a lot of elements in multiple places. So you can have the peaches on the wall, but I repainted in one of the painting, and in the big print that is like a big drawing on a banner, because I also use banner because we use banner as events. For me, it was also important to make the painting doesn't look like painting, but they have those metal thing around, like when you hang stuff outside because you're doing handmade. So, but in that big drawing at the white drawing at the background, inside of it, there's a lot of element that you can find back. There are like some elements are coming from, this is this one. So some elements are coming from the background actually is a picture I took from the Baltimore Museum. Other pictures are coming from picture I took in different places when I was doing like workshop or work across the world. And others are big elements that I put bigger are coming from historical painting, like the swan and the girl, who historically means it's when we see it in painting, it's the rape. It's the meaning is of a rape. So there's this sensuality, but also this kind of violence. But you can find this thing at multiple places also in the exhibition, smaller, bigger. Hi, my girl is there. As well as some little sculpture that are made that I redraw. I made it in purpose sometimes. So if a person stay a long time or come multiple times or just want to do it, there's a form of game also in the show where you can connect pre-made stuff with new one reinterpretation. And for me, that was also a way to link all of this together and how I create, maybe to answer your comment, I create for myself a form of ritual that maybe makes sense for me. And maybe just before closing, this is something that I didn't explain, but it's also important. This kind of thing that we see in my bag, this thing for me was important to reuse also those form of kind of pedestal, and I made them in paper because they make it more fragile. But all those little elements are like, as I said before, I have the feeling that ritual lost their glamour. We don't have purpose that much anymore to do this, but we still have those little knickknacks that mean something for us, that dry flower that, I don't know, your grandmother give you, and when you move, you would keep it with you. So I tried to elevate some of those as new form of ritual element that doesn't necessarily make sense for a person, but yes, for another one. So through that, I did kind of try to find a purpose for myself. What kind of ritual will make sense for me? And maybe it can add to the project, but I'm French Canadian, but also from Mi'kmaq roots, who's like one of the First Nations in Canada. And I'm really interested about, so this, and I didn't grow in with the community, so it's kind of a loss also in a certain way. But when you try to reconnect, this is interesting to find your personal object, or this, how ritual can be recreated in a certain way that will make more sense. So that was a long answer, but maybe it had some elements. That's it.
That definitely made sense. Thanks for clarifying that.
Well, thank you, Gabrielle. So as we're wrapping up, I just wanted to take a moment to thank both of the artists for participating, Gabrielle and also Kristen. She had to leave early for a prior engagement, but I'm glad we had the opportunity to gather you all here and listen to both of them and gain these amazing nuggets of insight into their works. It makes it all the better whenever you come and see it. And I also want to encourage you all who are here, if you're in town, the best opportunity to experience these is at the galleries. So we're always open noon to 6 on weekdays and noon to 5 on weekends, with the exception of Mondays. But also, if you want to get a chance to meet the artists in person, the next best event will be our third Thursday Art Walk night. We will be open for extended hours from 6 to 8 p.m. Gabrielle has offered to do another sort of artist talk, but the best thing is we'll be in person and she can point and we can walk. It'll be great. And then there'll also just be light refreshments. So we would love to see you all there. It'll be a great time. And again, thank you, artists, and I'll leave it to Tim.
Thanks, Cassie. That was actually a perfect wrap up. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this program. And I look forward to seeing you at the gallery. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.